welcome back to Herpetological Highlights. This is episode 188. I am Ben Marshall, and co-hosting, as always, is Tom Major. And oh boy, this episode, it's been a little while, but we're back, and we're back with some pretty familiar sort of topic and not as familiar species, although this is actually one that I've seen in the wild, and it's sort of to the genus, so that's something.
You've seen a wild garter snake?
I have seen a wild garter snake, several in fact.
Oh, very nice. But have you seen a giant garter snake, Ben?
I have seen large garter snakes, not the giant garter snake.
Yeah. This is a big whopper, the ultimate. And we're talking about them because we've got a paper about their movement behavior and the effects of translocation, which is something we've talked about on the podcast a few times before, this idea that moving snakes or any other animal around isn't always necessarily the best for the individual animal. Sometimes there are reasons for it, as we'll discuss. And sometimes, particularly in the case of snakes, if they're going to be bashed with a shovel, it's often better than that. So, rather be alive elsewhere and have been moved after having been deemed a nuisance than actually just be smashed to pieces by an angry human. But it's not always the best thing for them. So let's introduce the paper. It's by Nguyen, Halstead and Todd, 2024, Effect of Translocation on Home Range and Movements of Giant Garter Snakes, published in Global Ecology and Conservation. So right off the bat, we're talking about some isolated snake populations. We've got populations or groups of snakes living in relatively small numbers without any real gene flow, or often small fragments of suitable habitat in otherwise unsuitable areas. And obviously in this situation, if you're too isolated, it can end up with a host of problems. You can end up with inbreeding depression, where you just keep breeding with your cousins over and over and over again until you start to turn into terrible mutants. Or some populations can sort of withstand it, but by and large, a lot of these snake populations would previously have been part of like much larger sort of contiguous ranges where they were all sort of interconnected over large areas and could exchange their genes, but not so much anymore because of encroachment of humans, the rise of industrial agriculture.
Some species can be a lot more resistant to this than others, right? It is a very much a case-by-case sort of situation, not just whether certain species are trapped into smaller areas historically or something, but it can just be a characteristic of the species themselves. I feel there's a whole vulnerability to inbreeding.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, some species are really adapted to it. Some species are just like so accustomed to mating with their siblings they don't bat an eye. Some spiders are like that. But yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that for many species, particularly if they've experienced like a recent and relatively large reduction in their population size, their genetics could suffer as a result.
Yeah.
So in this paper we're talking about translocation. So the sort of headline of this is that some garter snakes are being moved as a conservation measure to sort of move them to a new place, spread them out.
Yes, it's not a getting them away from human persecution in this case. It's can we move them around to boost the sort of genetic stock that's existing in these isolated populations and sort of bolster them that way.
Yeah. And, we talked about translocations, moving of animals for different reasons, because they're nuisance or whatever. Often a lot of the papers are about rattlesnakes, but it happens with other snakes too. And what tends to happen is if you release them in somewhere they don't recognize in a completely new habitat far away from their original home, sometimes they'll make long unidirectional movements which appear like they're trying to find their way home, or they'll just be moving around erratically and doing a lot more movement, encompassing a lot more area than their sort of home range understanding counterparts. And they seem to have higher mortality rates as well. In some cases they're more likely to die. So there can be these drawbacks for snakes that are moved. However, for conservation purposes, if you're a founding population or if you're bolstering an existing population, they're kind of necessary pathfinders for their species in some way, and there will be some individuals who we as humans deem have to kind of run the gauntlet and try and set up a new population. And they may not have as much success as if they'd been there their whole lives, but it's kind of deemed to be necessary. Otherwise they're just not going to exist in a place. And we are taking the example of the giant garter snake, which is Thamnophis gigas, which is a whopping garter snake. and apparently it is both the heaviest and the longest of all garter snakes. It's massive. It gets to 163 centimeters long and nearly a kilogram in weight.
Pretty
it's a
hefty
wetland
for a garter snake, I'd say. That's.
I find when snakes like garter snakes, natracines, when they get big, they get a bit scary to me. Like, they look mean, and I guarantee they make some scary sounds. I bet you they hiss, but I don't know. I've never encountered one, but they just look mean. They look like it'd hurt you. But the weird thing is, a lot of them don't bite, so they've really got nothing to fear. But they will make a smell sometimes. They'll make a stinky, fishy smell. They get you away from them. It's worse than fishy. It's, at least I'm just going on the grass snakes here. I imagine garter snakes are similar. I don't know, but yeah, the smell.
I mean, they're having a pretty similar diet, aren't they? So I imagine that the sort of digestive system working on fish and frogs could probably result in something fairly unpleasant.
Yeah, and they're all natracines, right? This subfamily of Colubridae. So, yeah, this species, though, Thamnophis gigas, the giant garter snake, it's a wetland-dependent species. They need it nice and wet, and because of that, they're only endemic to a relatively small area of California, the Central Valley in the USA. So we're in Western America and sort of quite central to the sort of northern area of California, between more hilly areas, and that's where they're found. And I expect the reason that they're struggling quite so much is because that is also probably a very appealing place for humankind to live. I imagine it's quite fertile soils, quite nice, low-lying, beautiful climate.
Big roads slicing through their habitat too is the other thing that they highlight in this paper, is the sort of, not necessarily habitat loss, although that is a thing, but also this like splitting up of suitable areas. And you can probably assume a rather large snake, 1.6 meters, that's quite a lot of snake to get across a road safely in somewhere busy like Central California.
The longer you are, the longer it takes to cross.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine. Depends how fast you are as well. But yes, not ideal.
I don't know how fast these snakes can go.
Snakes and roads don't mix, especially as, they really can't take a hit anywhere and they're going to die. So the way they did this study, they had three populations of garter snakes, and they collected them using aquatic minnow traps, which I always think is cheating. If you've got a snake you can catch with minnow traps, it's not fair because it's so much easier than having to go out and find them. So they cheated a little bit. They caught the snakes that way.
I think that's just being smart.
Yeah, of course it is. And the snakes, they were doing a radio tracking study, so they were implanting transmitters inside the snakes, and they could only do this with snakes of a certain size, so snakes bigger than 200 grams. And because of that, they did only females. The males were too small. They wanted to have a nice sort of couple of years of tracking data, and so the transmitters for that ended up being quite large, so they couldn't do males, so they just had females. And they tracked a bunch of snakes, actually. They had 2 donor sites, so sites where they were finding native snakes that were going to donate to their new recipient site. One was a canal and one was a wetland. And then the site where they were putting the new snakes for the conservation project was also a wetland. And they caught 23 snakes at the canal and 27 at the wetland donor site. They then set out to monitor each of those, and they also collected... They took some of the snakes from one wetland to the other wetland and started tracking them again. And the idea was that they'd track the snakes at the original wetland and then capture some of them and move them so they could compare their pre and post movement behaviors, which is really cool. You don't really see that very often. You usually just see a blank comparison between ones which have been moved and ones which haven't been moved.
Yeah, because it's usually the case that these translocation studies are sort of done on snakes that are being translocated anyway, as opposed to sort of experimentally. So you don't get that before. You think of some of these studies where people were tracking translocated animals that had to be relocated because they were in someone's house, or causing trouble in some other way, or people causing trouble for them. You don't really get a choice of like, oh no, well we're going to leave them here for a year to get a baseline, and then we'll get them out of there. You don't have that opportunity. This they did. So it does add that extra nice sort of comparison that you're comparing basically apples to apples, because you have an individual that has been tracked in both scenarios, so you can make that direct comparison. And as opposed to being like, yeah, well, maybe he was just a weird individual that happened to get translocated, and they tended to be the ones that get in trouble anyway. So yeah. It's a cleaner comparison here than is often achievable.
Yeah. And so Well, what did they find out? I mean, should we discuss the differences or lack thereof between the translocated ranges and behavior and the non-translocated ranges and behavior? Is that a good place to start?
Yeah, I think that's really the key takeaway is the way I was sort of reading the paper is there didn't seem to be a massive difference between the two in general. Certainly in terms of the areas they covered, because of the way these snakes, you mentioned they were sort of wetland focused animals. So in these areas where the sort of wetter areas are sort of linear structures, be that sort of canals or channels in wetlands, you're tending to find the snakes sticking to those areas, and therefore the area used didn't seem to be dramatically different from one to the other.
Yeah, that really struck me too. You know, these are animals which only eat frogs and fish for the most part, so and they need it wet, right? I mean, if you're an animal which is suitable for sitting in the water a lot of the time, you can't just start bowling out into the agricultural areas around and about because you're just going to fry. So I think what's really struck me about this is that when they were in the canal before they left, they were literally just in the canals. And if you look at I found that really compelling when you see their maps of all the different points. They're literally just in the canals. They never really go anywhere else. Apparently the rice paddies around flood and they occasionally go in them in like the right parts of the year. But for the most part, they're just sticking in those canals. And like you say, similarly with the wetlands, they were just confined to the wetland areas. And so before or after the wetland snakes had been moved, they just stuck to where it was wet. And I think one of the things which struck me is that the site where they put this new snakes to form this new population is probably just really good habitat, and they didn't need to do anything else. They're like, okay, right, I'm in a wetland, so I'm just going to do the things I was doing in my other wetland. Right. There's no need to sort of explore widely. If I come to the edge of the water, all right, cool, I'll turn around. I'm not going to just bowl out for no reason because I've got what I need right here.
Yes, and I think that's sort of... So you were saying usually these translocated studies show up that these translocated snakes tend to move more and sort of book it in a single direction, some sort of homing behavior or something like that. And it really does sort of speak to either they're restricted to this wetland, i.e. they won't leave despite wanting to, or, like you're saying, it's so good that they didn't need to, so they never tried.
Yeah.
Separating out those two things, okay, a little bit tricky, but it's hard to tell without knowing the sort of motivation for dispersal in these snakes. Like maybe they do just not cross roads at all. Certainly that's a suggestion if they're so fragmented already.
Yeah, I would imagine they're probably pretty hesitant to cross roads. I mean, it's just going to be a massive... And they're diurnal, aren't they? So it's not like they can cross at night when it's a bit cooler. I think most of the time the roads are going to represent this gigantic open area of boiling hot desert that's grey, and they're just going to be not inclined for either predators or boiling alive to go across it. Yeah, but anyway, I think what is heartening about this is the fact that this is a very conservation relevant species, the giant garter snake. It's probably going to need more like translocation in the future because it's so fragmented, and there's a lot of places where it probably could now be reintroduced but isn't at the moment. I think USA, that is starting to gain a bit more. Well, obviously there's a lot of understanding of how important wetland systems are, but reading this, it seems like there might be some more wetland remediation going on, or maybe like flood defense stuff. I don't know. Like there does seem to be some indications of a bit of hope over there.
Yeah. I think the other thing that this is highlighting is the arrangement of these wetland areas might be a really big deal if you're to work out if animals are using them differently. Because like a canal, okay, they're existing there, but they're using it in a very different way to the wetlands because of the way, you've got these linear structures that are at 90 degrees and things like, and even comparing the maps of the two wetlands, it really does look like the shape of the area used by these snakes is dictated by the form of the wetland itself. So I do wonder whether sort of future studies and future work looking into this need to almost work out what is driving the micro of where these snakes are. There's sort of ins and outs of how they're using a particular wetland to know what features they're actually using. Because I think doing it on such a broad scale, really good. Like this is highlighting that they seem to have taken to it quite well. But you do wonder if there's certain features in these wetlands that are better than others, particularly when you look at the sort of canals and their persistence there. They're clearly focusing on one feature in a landscape which is otherwise less okay.
Yeah.
And I think with I can figure the Thai snakes with the Bungarus species out in the rice paddies sticking along field margins and sticking along irrigation canals. So we do know that this exists in other snakes. So I wouldn't be surprised if these guys are doing something similar. And instead of being, if you want to work out what would be good for them in the future, some of those features might be key.
Yeah. And I think tracking them more frequently would really help with that as well. I think they were doing it sort of average 2-3 times a week. I mean, if you get 20-30 times a day, you're going to be laughing with seeing how much they're doing.
It's quite a coarse scale in some regards. It certainly has picked out something quite interesting, but there's definitely more to dive into there. Yeah.
Especially as they were talking about net displacement, so how much the snakes are actually moving around. And that measure is something which the more points you get, the more accurate it's going to be. If it's taking these ones in the new wetland longer to find prey, you'll be able to see that because they'll be searching around more, like looking for more stuff. So really nice paper with some quite like surprising good conservation news, which is really nice.
I think so. Yes, I think so. I think it's definitely optimistic.
Yeah, it's optimistic. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so cool paper, giant garter snakes being moved around and tracked and conserved successfully. So should we move on to our species of the bi-week?
Yes, I think so.
All right. So we got a paper by Aksornneam, Rujirawan, Yodthong S, and Aowphol, 2024, a new species of krait of the genus Bungarus. You just mentioned Bungarus, Ben.
Where's the segue?
Which is obviously a krait. Yeah, you did miss a segue. Wow. From Ratchaburi Province, Western Thailand, this is published in Zoosystematics and Evolution. So, shout out to the main author, Aksornneam. He's a friend of ours. So yeah, congratulations, Arm. Awesome work. We both worked with Arm when we were out in Thailand. Arm is obviously continuing his snake research, which is awesome. This isn't the first species he's described. I'm not even sure this is the first time I think we've done one of Arm's papers on the podcast before describing another snake.
Maybe we've done a lot of species of the bi-week at this point.
Yeah, they all meld into one. But anyway, awesome.
A bit.
Great to see it, and it's a really nice paper. So yeah, we're talking about Bungarus kraits. They are a radiation of Elapidae snakes, highly venomous in Asia.
Yeah, very, very venomous.
And prior to this, we knew of 17 species in this genus Bungarus, which are these kind of classic venomous snakes. They're usually darkly coloured, quite often black. They often have brightly coloured yellow or white bands. And they've been kind of tricky to determine the species relationships because of how visually similar a lot of the species look, even when they live quite far away from each other.
And with, I know this doesn't confuse the Bungarus situation, but the fact that there are mimics of them as well, sort of highlighting how useful this coloration and patterning is. So it makes sense that a lot of Bungaruses look quite similar if you've also got species outside of Bungarus trying to hop on the bandwagon and sort of follow and make use of the Bungarus venomness.
Yeah.
Venomosity.
A little bit of Malarian and Batesian. Venomousness.
Venomousness.
So that's Malarian and Batesian mimicry you've mentioned there, Ben.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's all mixed up together.
Yeah.
Black and white stripy snakes, yellow and black stripy snakes.
And snakes which are pretending.
Attention.
Yeah, and is it lots of snakes doing the same thing because they're equally dangerous and a few are copying? Or is it, who knows? But it's cool that there's this many yellow and black snakes. And yeah, we're talking about a new species here from Khao Kratchom, which is Thai for Kratchom Mountain, which is part of this Tenasserim mountain range in Ratchaburi Province. We're in Western Thailand, kind of close to the Thai-Myanmar border.
Yeah, that whole mountain range runs all the way down, pretty much all the way down the sort of Malay, well, most of the way down the Malay Peninsula too, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a long range. And so, yeah, it contains a variety of forest habitats, this Tenasserim mountain range in particular. And they range from kind of 200 meters above sea level to more than 1,100. So, sort of getting into your medium elevations there. And this new species has been found. They found these at night. They actually did come across them and find them in real life. It wasn't a museum specimen. And they've given it a name, Bungarus sagittatus. And this specific epithet, sagittatus, is derived from sagittar in Latin, which means arrow, and it references the dark triangular shape on their subcaudals, which apparently resemble a barbed arrow. So the subcaudals are the scales underneath the tail, after the cloaca. So you got to get pretty close to this thing to look at its subcaudals.
Yeah,
but if
not
you
exactly suggested, advisable.
Cool. Are you Bungarus sagittatus? Yeah, I'll take your word for it. Cool. But yeah, they found them at night, almost certainly nocturnal. Most of these kraits are nocturnal. They slither about in the night. They love eating things which are shaped like tubes. Most kraits eat snakes. Some of them eat like eels or elongated fish. And some of them eat skinks. And this one has been seen eating a skink, Reeves,
which is still quite
skink.
tube-shaped, to be fair.
They're smooth and they're tubey. They are probably the tubiest of lizards.
Other than worm lizards, agreed.
Yeah, but they're smoother than worm lizards. Worm lizards are rough, aren't they?
They are a bit rough, yeah.
Yeah.
Lumpy tubes.
Yeah, whereas these are very smooth. So I think there's a bit of a debate to be had about which is the smoother of the two. But regardless, there is a smooth skink, Skinkella reevesii, which they have quite small legs. So, once you tuck them in, they're more or less quite snaky. They're not teeny tiny legs, but they are quite small and snaky. The habitat looks great. Looks like some nice forest in Thailand. Just a nice new species. How big is it, Ben?
What's that? 80 centimeters SVL?
80 centimeters SVL. So it's quite small.
That's the female holotype they found. But the others they found were a bit smaller. So it's you're talking between like half a meter and
And this is
no 80 centimeters. My brain. Yes, 80 centimeters, 800 millimeters.
And this is like a typical sort of krait coloration. It's got a black base color. Well, or has that got a white base color? But it's black and white. And
well, the underneath is white.
The underneath is white. So
I would go with white base color with black over the top.
It's got like they are bands. They do form bands around the top of the snake. However, it kind of looks more like big black blotches along the back. But you get this very striking black on white, which is obviously quite shocking to see. You're like, oh god, especially when they're moving. It's like, wow, what's happening? So our little ape brains get a bit jumpy at that kind of thing, which works well. And it's got a very smooth, shiny head, very quite small eye, which is a good way of telling kraits away apart from their non-venomous cousins, generally, not always. And it also has that weird scalation along the spine. Kraits have these like giant scales along their spines that make them look like
it's quite distinct on this one, isn't it?
Yeah, they look like belly scales. But yeah, that's the way to tell a krait as well. So they also tend to be quite triangular compared to their non-venomous relatives. There's a few things you can look out for, but don't be checking their subcaudals unless you're sure. So cool. I think that's about it. Congratulations to Arm and the rest of the team for describing that really cool species. Awesome stuff. Have you got any other business this week, Ben?
I do not have any other business this week. Nope.
Right. I've got quite a bit. So just some personal news I thought I'd mention. I finished my PhD, so I'm officially thanks, man. Yeah, so I'm officially Dr. Major now, which is sick. Really excited. Yeah, had a nice Viva and everything. Went back up to Bangor to do that. So got to see Wolfgang and everyone else, all my awesome field assistants. We went out for a meal. Yeah, did the Viva, which was great.
So now you can speak with a new backed up piece of paper authority on everything.
Can you hear it in my voice?
Yeah. I'm scared of correcting you now.
Yeah, well, this is how it should have been the whole time. So
finally the balance has been restored.
Yeah, until you get yours. So yeah, just thought I'd mention that. And also I went to Costa Rica, and I saw so many snakes while I was there. It was absolutely brilliant. Found a wild boa imperator, Central American boa, which was crazy. Introduced my mate Theo to herping as well. It was his first ever night going out at night looking for snakes, and we found a giant boa. And I was like, literally,
that's
don't get
a
used
pretty
to
good
this.
intro.
Yeah, so I think he's like forever broken now. I don't think he's going to sleep again because he lives in Costa Rica at the Santa Rosa National Park. He like works on the conservation project on monkeys there. He puts cameras in trees with ropes, which is very cool. But yeah, got him out snaking, and he took to it like a duck to water. So that was pretty fun.
Amazing.
We just saw so many cool snakes. Saw the eyelash viper, Bothriechis. It's now Nigro adspersus. They changed the name. But we didn't see a yellow one, but we saw a really cool green and red mottled one. That was awesome.
Beautiful.
But yeah, I'll probably be littering anecdotes about Costa Rica into the podcast for the rest of the time. And I also did record some frog calls there, which I stayed at this place called the Costa Rica Amphibian Research Center. This guy called Brian Kubicki runs it, who's like insane amphibian expert. The guy's like proper human encyclopedia of amphibians.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating talking to him, and he ID'd some of the calls that I had recorded for me. So I was like, this is amazing. I was like, Brian, what's this? He knew them all. So I've got some that are actually ID'd, because the ones I recorded in India, they don't have IDs attached to them. So they're just
you
nice
just
frog
got
calls.
frog calls. Great.
Yeah, it's hard to work them out. So but yeah, that is the update.
So what you're saying is, for me, it would be wise for me to be familiar with Costa Rican frog calls to give myself an upper hand when they're presented to me unknown.
Well, it couldn't hurt, Ben. It couldn't hurt. Yeah. But, there are a hell of a lot of species. I think...
How many can there be?
I think there's
6?
I think there's 120 or something. It might be less. I feel like some of the reserves I was staying at, they were like, yeah, we got 60 species here. So I feel like if you scale that up to all the endemics, it's going to be a lot. I don't know. I shouldn't have thrown out a number without being sure. But yeah, it's a lot of frogs. But hey, if you want to give it a go, I'll be impressed. And you could potentially take the lead. But yeah, so other than that, I just wanted to mention a couple of new patrons. We got Shira and Etienne, so thanks very much to you both.
Thank you,
legends. Link in the show notes if you want to become a patron. And then we had a couple of emails. So we had one from Jessica Yates, who is a PhD student in Central Florida. And apparently a couple of episodes ago, we mentioned Ptericha thamnophis, the evolutionary arms race between the snakes and the newts in America. Jessica's mentioning the intensity of Ptericha toxins. Apparently these newt toxins, Ben, are no joke. This is the email from Jessica. When I was teaching herpetology in East Texas during my master's, I took the students out to the local bayou for a night survey, and we found 2 eastern newts, which are Notophthalmus viridescens. I picked up the animals to show the students, but later on in the night, a bug flew into my eye, and I rubbed it with my newt fingers. The burning was some of the worst I felt in my eyes. I had to pull the water bladder out of my osprey to try and flush it out. My eyes were red for days, and this gooey yellow-green stuff was oozing out the whole following week. Oh, man. That sounds grim. Sorry for the too much information. Well, it's too late now. Ben is right. Wear gloves when handling newts. Thankfully, the eastern newt's tetrodotoxin is not as intense as Ptericha. I learned my lesson. Love the podcast. Keep up the great work.
There we go. See, that's a good public service announcement right there.
Yeah, don't pick up newts and rub your eyes. And then we also had a question, Ben. This is from our new patron, Shira Loa. Hi, Tom and Ben. I've been binge listening to your podcast. Well, admittedly, only the episodes about snakes. I'm a bit biased. Yeah, fair enough. Snakes are the best.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, snakes are the best. So for the last few days, she's just been listening for the last few days, really enjoying it. Had a question. So she does a YouTube channel, and she had a question on there. Maybe we might know. It's about ontogenetic color change. So why do snakes change from juvenile to adult? Some are really brightly colored as babies and they get less colorful, and others get more colorful as they get older. Shira says, the latter makes more sense to me, since tiny noodles are more vulnerable, and if they stand out more, they might get eaten more quickly. So why would they be more brightly colored? The example of green tree pythons, which go from bright yellow or red to green. is a good one. Shira mentions another one, baby Sanzinia volontani, which is Sanzinia is the Madagascan
Yep.
boas,
Python.
right? Yeah.
Python?
Boa.
Boa?
Yeah, no. Boas. Yeah. It's a weird one though, yeah, but it's boa. So they also get less colourful as they get older. Shira points out that adults spend a lot of time on the ground compared to juveniles, which are more arboreal. So maybe they become brown to blend in with the forest floor. But then why such brightly coloured babies? And then on the contrary, Japanese rat snake, she's got one, sort of dull brown green with a hint of blue. But her parents are very bright blue, and she's supposed to get bluer with age. So yeah, that's another interesting sort of opposing example.
So just thinking about dramatic changes, and my own bias here. Young king cobras, baby king cobras, very distinctly stripy. So stripy that you could, I don't know, confuse them for a Bungarus or something. If you were some sort of ill-educated raptor or something like that. So I wonder whether some of the brightly coloured babies is using some sort of aposematism free ride, like we were just talking about with the mimicry. For the green tree pythons, I don't know whether that would track.
Yeah, I think I don't know if there's anything. Because yeah, it does depend somewhat on the mimics. I think the bright coloured baby green tree pythons are. I think it just works well as camouflage, to be honest. I think actually, if you're small enough, being bright red or bright yellow, and especially in daylight, can help you blend in quite well. Like if you're looking at leaves if you're looking at sun coming through leaves and you're looking at something yellow, it's like impossible. When I was in Costa Rica, I was looking for the yellow eyelash viper everywhere in the daytime, and you just can't see them, even though the reserve I was in was supposed to be full of them. And I think that they're just really hard to spot because a light yellow in a green and brown in sunlight is actually super hard to spot. And apparently there are like anecdotal reports of them hanging out in plants with flowers that color, which again would obviously make them quite tricky to spot.
Yes, and then bigger, darker, less light sort of penetration through leaves sort of tallies up with being, and it is also assuming that what we're seeing is what their predators see, because there is obviously a different, again, the sort of bird example, birds are seeing a very different world to us with their sensitivity to like UV and whatnot, so the change from yellow to green might not be as critical for things that are looking to eat them.
And a lot of mammals can't see red, right? So maybe some of those baby green trees look green. Because, like you see that image of a tiger from this perspective of a deer, and it's like green and black stripes. And then we see it and we're like, that thing's orange, but not everything can see that distinction.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
really good point. Yeah. I did dig up a paper. So I think for a lot of the snakes, essentially, we don't exactly know. Like there hasn't been that work done to work out why this benefits them, and hopefully someone will do it.
Yeah, I know. We're just sort of spitballing.
Yeah, 100%.
This isn't backed up. This is just best guesses.
But there was a review of the evolutionary significance of ontogenetic colour change. So this is those colour changes that occur throughout the life of the animal. It was reviewed in 2008 by Carey Booth in a publication in the Biological Journal of the Linnean Society. And apparently there are loads of reasons known for different animals why they change colour. So it can be just simply because they change in size and it's like something mechanical about the way the colour is made.
Yep.
Or vulnerability to predators, obviously what we've just been discussing. Reproductive status can confer colour changes, but also changes into the habitat and metabolism as well. So there are lots and lots of potential reasons. They can also, they do mention in this
like
paper
industrial melanism and stuff like that.
Yeah, industrial melanism. But there's
not
also
that you'd see that ontogenetically necessarily, but you could.
You'd think it would like accumulate or
right?
Well,
maybe unless it was passed down.
It's not like it's yeah. That's true. You mean like when animals sort of they don't know they sequester it, but they store the toxins in their color. Organelles. Yeah, like the pigeons and stuff.
Yeah, pigeons, moths,
And there's those sea snakes that did it. Yeah, that could make a colour change.
Yes, the sea snakes too.
juvenile to adulthood, couldn't it? But yeah, they also point out that a lot of the color changes might just be neutral or non-adaptive, so that they're just there because of like inertia. They maybe had a use, or they just are as they are. Like it's just the way it worked. It's just the easiest way of doing something, so they've continued to do it. But yeah, lots and lots of reasons, lots and lots more questions to answer in that vein, basically. So yeah, awesome question. Thank you, Shira.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. You've got quite a few green arboreal snakes that have warmer coloration when young and then going green. Because you've got things like the green cat-eyed snake too, which has that sort of yellow-green, but then with a green head, and then going all green when it becomes older.
Yep, corallus do it. All those tree boas, they do it. Green tree, obviously green tree pythons do it.
The ubiquity there across quite sort of different species would suggest that there's something else going on, some sort of commonality, right? That's not just these ones have happened to work out a way of producing green in a certain way. I mean, I suppose it depends what the ancestral state is, but yeah, it's an interesting question. Really interesting question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it was fun to think about for a bit. So, yeah, I think that's it for me for any other business. You haven't got anything else?
Nope.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, I think that all that remains to be said then is you can find us on social media. You can email us if you've got a question or a correction, herphighlights@gmail.com. Thanks as ever to our patrons, new and old, your legends. And yeah, we will catch you next week. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.